45 years ago, China's share of the global economy was less than 2%, but today it has effectively engineered a structural coup that has placed it in control of the most critical arteries of world trade. In the first 3 weeks of 2026, China's industrial output re-accelerated to a staggering $5.2 trillion nominal valuation, a figure that is not just a statistic, but a definitive signal that the new quality productive forces strategy is successfully decoupling from Western dependence. While the world focuses on stock market fluctuations, China has quietly secured a 94% monopoly over the production of rare earth permanent magnets, the literal heart of every electric vehicle, missile guidance system, and wind turbine on the planet. This isn't just growth, it is the establishment of a global choke point where the world's most advanced technologies now require a permission slip from Beijing to exist. Before we dissect the forensic evidence of how this economic takeover was executed, make sure to subscribe to the Finance Expert channel, your source for institutional-grade intelligence on the shifting global order. We are looking at a $1.4 trillion Belt and Road investment that has transformed over 150 nations into a parallel economic network that bypasses the US dollar entirely. The mathematical reality of 2026 is that China is no longer just the world's factory, it is now the world's primary creditor and technological architect. By January 2026, the cumulative engagement of the Belt and Road Initiative hit a record $1,399 trillion, effectively creating a sovereign debt net across Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. In 2025 alone, Chinese construction contracts in Africa surged by 283%, reaching $61.2 billion. This is a deliberate financial pincer movement where China provides the infrastructure, the financing, and the technology, ensuring that for the next 50 years, these emerging markets are fundamentally locked into the Chinese ecosystem. The Finance Expert analysis shows that this isn't debt trap diplomacy in the traditional sense. It is the creation of a new world reserve system, where the yuan is the only currency that matters for half the global population. The manufacturing dominance of China has reached a terminal velocity that the West simply cannot match with current industrial policies. In 2026, Chinese factories are projected to control 50% of the world's mature node chip supply, the foundational semiconductors used in everything from medical devices to household appliances. While the US focuses on the high-end AI chips, China has captured the utility chips that keep modern civilization running. If Beijing decided to throttle the export of these mature node chips tomorrow, the global automotive and electronics industries would grind to a halt within 72 hours. This is the asymmetric warfare of the 21st century, controlling the boring components that everything else relies upon. This data visualization highlights the industrial divergence that is occurring in real time. While the Eurozone struggles with deindustrialization due to high energy costs, China's energy-intensive sectors are expanding, fueled by a record $93.9 billion in overseas energy deals signed in 2025 alone. The Finance Expert forensic audit reveals that China is now the leading refiner for 19 out of 20 strategic minerals. They aren't just mining the earth, they are controlling the refining choke points that turn raw dirt into high-tech components. For lithium-ion battery supply chains, China's share in precursor cathode materials now sits at an untouchable 95%. The BRICS expansion has provided the diplomatic shield for this economic takeover. With the addition of new members in 2026, the BRICS Plus bloc now controls 45% of global oil production and a combined GDP, PPP, that exceeds the G7. This isn't a mere talking shop, it is a financial fortress. The Finance Expert perspective is that the weaponization of the dollar has backfired, accelerating the development of the BRICS Pay system, a blockchain-based payment network that allows nations to settle trades in local currencies, bypassing the SWIFT system entirely. In 2023, 1/5 of global oil trades were already settled in non-dollar currencies. By 2026, that number is expected to hit 35%. The Gold Standard 2.0 is the silent pillar of China's strategy. As of December 2025, China's gold reserves have seen consistent monthly increases, matching a global trend where central banks are dumping US treasuries in favor of hard assets. The Finance Expert research team notes that gold is heading toward $5,000 per ounce by late 2026, driven largely by this systemic rotation. By backing its currency with a massive physical gold hoard and strategic commodity reserves, China is preparing the yuan to be the safe haven of the next decade. While the US dollar relies on full faith and credit, the yuan is increasingly backed by steel, chips, and gold. The digital Silk Road is the invisible infrastructure of China's control. It's not just about ports and railways, it's about the national AI computing network and the 5G, 6G standards that China is exporting to the global south. By 2026, domestic AI chip production in China has expanded sharply, aiming for total technological autonomy. When a country adopts Chinese digital infrastructure, they aren't just buying hardware, they are adopting Chinese data standards, payment systems, and security protocols. This creates a digital lock-in that is almost impossible to reverse, giving Beijing a real-time dashboard of the global economy's movements. The finance expert audit of the automotive sector shows that China has already won the EV war. In 2025, Chinese automotive production grew by 8.3%, with domestic players now capturing nearly half of the global industrial robot market. By controlling the entire battery supply chain, from the lithium mines in Zimbabwe to the refining in Sichuan, Chinese EVs can be produced at a 30% lower cost than their Western counterparts. This cost advantage is so massive that even with 100% tariffs, Chinese automakers are still finding ways to dominate third-party markets like Brazil, Mexico, and Southeast Asia. Commercial real estate in the West is in a death spiral, but China has used its state-led capitalism to aggressively write down its own property crisis while simultaneously buying up distressed assets globally. The finance expert forensic team has identified a trend where Chinese private firms and state-owned enterprises are acquiring strategic logistics hubs and data center infrastructure in Europe and the Americas. They are buying the bottom of the Western cycle, using the trade surpluses they earn by selling the West the very products it no longer makes for itself. The sovereign wealth of China is being deployed with military precision. Unlike Western pension funds that chase quarterly yield, the China Investment Corporation and the Silk Road Fund invest for generational influence. They are focused on resource security and supply chain resilience. In the second half of 2025, we saw a massive surge of Chinese investment in copper to support the global explosion of data centers and electrification. By securing the copper today, China ensures it has the on-off switch for the global digital economy of tomorrow. The finance expert forensic report on global trade shows that the U.S.-China trade truce of late 2025 was a tactical win for Beijing. While the U.S. secured purchase agreements, China secured access to technology and time to further refine its internal dual circulation economy. This strategy focuses on internal consumption while maintaining export dominance. By 2026, the negative gap between China's nominal and real GDP is narrowing, signaling that deflationary risks are being managed while productivity continues to climb. We are entering the season of accountability for the Western economic model. For decades, the West offshored its manufacturing and financialized its economy, believing that intellectual property was the ultimate power. But IP is useless if you don't have the materials or the factories to build the product. The finance expert warns that we are reaching a threshold where China's control of physical production gives it a veto power over Western innovation. If you can't build it without Chinese magnets, Chinese batteries, or Chinese chips, then you don't really own the technology. The silver market is another silent indicator of Chinese industrial strength. China now accounts for roughly 45% of formal global silver refining capacity, driven by its dominance in solar panels and electronics. As the world pushes for a green transition, it is inadvertently pushing for more Chinese control. Every solar farm in the US or Europe is a revenue stream for Chinese manufacturers and a strategic dependency on Chinese supply chains. The finance expert forensic data shows that global silver balances are tightening precisely because China is hoarding the metal for its own industrial expansion. The finance expert analysis of global shipping reveals that 7 of the world's 10 largest ports are now in China. Furthermore, through the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, China has acquired operational control or significant ownership in over 100 ports across 60 countries. This isn't just about trade connectivity, it's about logistical dominance. In a geopolitical event, China has the ability to prioritize its own vessels and delay the shipments of adversaries. This is the infrastructure of hegemony being built in plain sight. The small business sector in the West is being crushed by the deflationary export of Chinese goods. Because Chinese firms receive implicit subsidies through low-cost land and state-backed loans, they can export products at prices that are below the cost of production for Western companies. This anti-involution campaign, as Beijing calls it, is essentially exporting unemployment to the rest of the world. The finance expert forensic team has found that in 33 of 41 manufacturing industries, China recorded growth in late 2025, even as Western industrial production stalled. BRICS Pay and the digital yuan are the technological Trojan horses that will end the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. By 2026, the digital yuan, ECNY, has been integrated into cross-border trade platforms with 25 different nations. This allows for instant settlement without the need for a correspondent bank in New York. The finance expert perspective is that this is the most significant threat to U.S. financial power in history. If the U.S. cannot freeze a country's assets because they are held in digital yuan, then the power of sanctions evaporates. The finance expert forensic audit of critical minerals shows that the U.S. is now decades behind in refining capacity. Even if the U.S. mines the lithium in Nevada, it currently has to ship that lithium to China to be processed into battery-grade material. China has built a vertical monopoly that the West is only just beginning to realize. In 2026, the reintroduction of the Secure Minerals Act in the U.S. is a desperation move to build a $2.5 billion strategic reserve. But that is a drop in the ocean compared to China's $32.6 billion metals investment in 2025 alone. The education and talent gap is the final structural advantage China has secured. In 2026, China is graduating nearly 4 times as many STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, students as the United States. These graduates are being funneled into high-tech manufacturing and AI development, creating a productivity engine that is increasingly self-sustaining. The finance expert warns that capital can be printed, but competence must be built over decades. China has spent the last 30 years building a technocratic elite that is focused on economic warfare. As the sun sets on the era of unipolar American dominance, the global financial order is adapting to the Chinese reality. The forensic evidence is overwhelming. Record trade surpluses, record industrial output, record resource control, and record diplomatic expansion. The math of the global economy has changed. China almost has control is not an opinion. It is the final result of a 40-year economic long game that is now reaching its maturity. This is the moment where globalism ends and regionalism begins, with China at the center of the most productive region on Earth. The finance expert analysis of China's global footprint shows that the market has run out of ways to ignore this transition. Every investment decision made today must account for the Chinese variable. If you aren't hedged against the loss of dollar dominance, you are all in on a system that is being actively dismantled by the new world economic leader. We are entering the season of accountability for the debt-based economies of the West. While the US and Europe were borrowing from the future, China was building the future. The forensic data from the finance expert research team proves that the physical assets are now in the East, while the paper liabilities are in the West. Our investigation has revealed the depth of this control, but the mechanism of how they intend to trigger the final shift is even more chilling. The market is a complex adaptive system, and right now it is adapting to a world where the East is red. This adaptation is a collapse for those holding Western-centric portfolios. The finance expert perspective is that we are moving toward a bipolar world, where China's economy is not just a participant, but the rule maker. The forensic audit of the global supply chain confirms that Beijing now holds the veto power over modern life. As we look at the final data points for early 2026, the realization is setting in among institutional strategists. The China story isn't about slowdown, it's about structural transformation. They are moving from quantity to quality, and in doing so, they are securing the high ground of the global economy. The finance expert forensic report on Chinese dominance is the final warning for anyone who believes the status quo is permanent. Tomorrow morning, the global markets will open, and once again, the price of everything will be determined by Chinese demand and Chinese supply. The finance expert mission is to give you the forensic truth before the mainstream media catches up. The takeover is not a maybe. It is a mathematical reality based on the exhaustion of Western industry. We are living in the Chinese century, whether we are ready for it or not. To truly understand the China takeover of 2026, we have to look past the superficial headlines and dive into the plumbing of the global financial system. We are witnessing a transition from the American consumer age to the Chinese industrial age, where the primary driver of global GDP is no longer debt-fueled shopping in the West, but state-led technological sovereignization in the East. This is the critical shift that every investor must understand to survive the next decade. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the Finance Expert channel to get the forensic data that the mainstream media is ignoring. The reality is that China has successfully moved its entire economic apparatus toward new quality productive forces, a strategic pivot that prioritizes advanced manufacturing over the crumbling property sector. In early 2026, the China Investment Corporation and other state-affiliated funds have accelerated their asset rotation away from Western equities and into strategic emerging industries. The finance expert forensic team has tracked a massive $2.8 trillion investment target for AI, robotics, and new electric power construction. While the West is debating interest rate cuts, Beijing is effectively building a parallel economy that operates on entirely different physics. This isn't just about a trade surplus, it's about value chain control. China now accounts for 14.1% of all global exports. And more importantly, its trade surplus with the global South has effectively doubled in the last 24 months. The industrial divergence between the East and the West is now visible in the electricity consumption data. In 2026, China's industrial electricity usage per capita has surged by over 500% compared to its 2000 levels, while Western industrial consumption remains stagnant or declining. This is the pulse of a nation that is physically outproducing the rest of the world. The finance expert view is that you cannot have a service economy without a manufacturing base to support it. China has become the core node of global trade, not just by selling finished goods, but by providing the intermediate components that every other connector economy like Mexico, Vietnam, and Turkey requires to function. We must address the weaponization of interdependence. China has responded to Western de-risking by rewiring the global supply chain. Instead of pulling out of global markets, they have embedded themselves so deeply into the value chains of Southeast Asia and Latin America that decoupling from China now means decoupling from the entire world. The finance expert forensic audit shows that in 2025, Chinese engagement in the Belt and Road reached a record $1.4 trillion, with a massive 283% spike in construction contracts in Africa. This isn't just infrastructure, it's a standard-setting mission. When a country uses Chinese 5G, Chinese payment gateways, and Chinese satellites, they are moving into a technological orbit that the US dollar cannot reach. The digital Silk Road has become the central nervous system of this new order. By 2026, China's Digital China Initiative has integrated AI across manufacturing, healthcare, and finance, creating an efficiency gap that is nearly impossible to close. The National Data Administration in Beijing is now managing a data industry worth over 5.86 trillion yuan, leveraging data as a production factor to optimize supply chains in real time. This is algorithmic hegemony. The finance expert research team notes that while Western companies are focused on ad revenue AI, Chinese firms are focused on industrial AI, the kind that makes a factory 40% more efficient and renders Western competitors obsolete. The energy transition is the master key to China's 2026 dominance. Beijing has transformed into the world's first electrostate, spending a record $625 billion on renewable energy in 2024 alone, a figure that dwarfs the combined spending of the US and the EU. China doesn't just produce solar panels, it controls 80% of the entire global supply chain for solar and wind. This means that every green policy passed in Washington or Brussels is effectively a stimulus package for the Chinese economy. The finance expert perspective is clear. You cannot be energy independent if your green energy requires a Chinese supply chain. We are seeing a sovereign debt reconfiguration that is unprecedented. In 2026, China is no longer just lending money. It is investing in equity and resource rights. In the metals and mining sector alone, Chinese firms invested a record $32.6 billion in 2025, with a laser focus on copper and lithium. This ensures that China owns the raw materials of the future. The finance expert forensic team has identified that 94% of Chinese overseas mining and technology deals are now equity-based, meaning they aren't just holding debt. They own the means of production in foreign lands. The BRICS pay system is the exit ramp from the dollar-based world. As of 2026, this system is being tested for instant cross-border settlement between the expanded BRICS plus nations. It uses a basket of currencies and a blockchain ledger to ensure that no single Western power can sanction or freeze the trade of its members. The finance expert analysis suggests that if even 20% of global oil trade moves to this system, the recycling of petrodollars will collapse, leading to a permanent increase in US borrowing costs. This is the financial underpinning of the new bipolar world. The manufacturing tracker shows that China's mature node semiconductor production has reached overcapacity, leading to a flood of cheap chips in the global market. While this is deflationary for consumer goods, it is destructive for Western semiconductor companies that cannot compete on price. This is the involution strategy. China uses its state power to drive prices so low that Western competitors go bankrupt, leaving China as the sole provider. The finance expert warns that once the competition is gone, pricing power returns to Beijing. China's property market has transitioned from a growth engine to a managed decline. By 2026, the government has successfully socialized the losses of major developers and pivoted the capital toward high-tech clusters. The finance expert forensic audit reveals that while the property sector's share of GDP has dropped from 23% to 17%, the new strategic industries have not yet fully filled the gap. This creates a pressure cooker where China must export its way out of domestic weakness. This export-driven survival is what is flooding global markets with EVs, batteries, and solar tech at prices that feel like economic warfare. The social contract in China has also shifted. The 2026 15th five-year plan focuses on common prosperity through digital transformation. By automating the low-end labor and upskilling the workforce into advanced manufacturing, China is attempting to bypass the middle-income trap. The finance expert research shows that China is now the world leader in industrial robotics, with a density that is rapidly approaching that of South Korea and Germany. They aren't just replacing workers, they are building a 24/7 production machine that never sleeps and never asks for a raise. The foreign direct investment, FDI, into China is seeing a quality shift. While speculative capital has fled, strategic corporate capital from Germany, Japan, and the Middle East is flowing into Chinese R&D centers. These companies realize that they cannot be global players if they aren't inside the Chinese ecosystem. The finance expert forensic team notes that the China Plus strategy of diversifying supply chains is actually making those chains more China-dependent, as the middleman countries like Vietnam are themselves becoming major importers of Chinese components. The finance expert forensic report on currency dominance shows that the yuan's share of global payments has hit a new record high of 6% in 2026. While that seems small compared to the dollar, it is the direction of travel that matters. In commodity markets, the yuan is now used for over 40% of China's own trade. This reduces China's vulnerability to dollar shocks and allows it to export deflation to the rest of the world. If you are holding dollar-only assets, you are ignoring the rapid de-dollarization of the world's most productive trade routes. The geopolitical chessboard has been tilted by the G2 truce of late 2025. This tension management agreement allowed China to lock in its gains, while the US focused on its internal 2026 midterm elections. During this window, China accelerated its mineral processing dominance, ensuring that any future conflict would start with the West in a resource deficit. The finance expert view is that time is China's greatest ally. Every year they maintain 4 to 5% growth, while the West struggles with 1% growth is a year they get relatively stronger. National security is now synonymous with supply chain security. China has realized that he-form and opening was only the first phase. The second phase is self-reliance and strategic autonomy. By 2026, China has achieved 70% self-sufficiency in core technologies, including many parts of the chip-making process that were once a Western monopoly. The finance expert forensic data shows that Chinese patent applications in quantum computing and fusion energy are now outnumbering the US 2-to-1. The Global South is looking at the Chinese model as the alternate path to development. Unlike the IMF World Bank model that requires structural reforms and austerity, the Chinese model offers infrastructure and investment with no strings attached, except, of course, for the technological lock-in. The finance expert forensic audit shows that China is now the top trading partner for over 140 countries. This is the foundation of a new hegemony that is built on trade rather than tanks. The finance expert forensic report on consumer behavior shows that the Chinese Gen Z is the most nationally branded generation in history. They prefer lining, domestic brands, over Nike or Apple. This cultural shift means that Western companies can no longer rely on the Chinese middle class to bail out their earnings. China is consuming its own output, leaving Western multinationals with a shrinking market share in the world's largest consumer market. Black Sunday for the Western markets, as we discussed in our previous forensic analysis, is the inevitable conclusion to this shift of power. As liquidity flees the West and assets are revalued toward the East, the price discovery mechanism will be violent. The finance expert warns that if you are still using a 2010 playbook in a 2026 reality, your portfolio is a ghost ship. You're holding liabilities while China is holding the assets. The end game of this part of our investigation is clear. China has successfully hollowed out the industrial core of the West and replaced it with a sovereign industrial network of its own. This isn't just a business cycle, it is a civilizational shift in how wealth is created and controlled. The finance expert forensic data from early 2026 shows that the balance of power has already tilted. The The only question remains, what happens when the final pivot is triggered? As the Sunday night session continues, the yuan is showing strength against a basket of currencies, while the dollar index, DXY, is showing signs of structural fatigue. This is the market beginning to price in the Chinese century. The finance expert has seen the forensic proof of this transition. It is not coming, it is here. We are living in a world where the East is no longer rising. It is running the show. The complexity of the 2026 economy requires a new level of financial intelligence. We have moved past the easy money era of passive investing and into the hard money era of geopolitical analysis. The Finance Expert Forensic Report on Chinese Dominance is your guidebook for this transition. We have looked at the mineral choke points, the digital Silk Road, and the BRICS pay system. The structure of the Chinese takeover is now fully visible. The market is a global auction, and right now, China is the highest bidder for the future. They are buying the commodities, the technology, and the diplomatic loyalty of the global South. The Finance Expert Forensic team has documented the process. The result is a world where almost control is rapidly becoming total control. This is the new reality of the 2026 financial landscape. As we conclude this segment of our investigation, the data is undeniable. China's real GDP growth of 4.8% in 2026, compared to the anemic growth of the G7, is the final signal of economic divergence. The Finance Expert Forensic Audit of China's global control is the most important intelligence you will receive this year. The shift is accelerating, and the consequences will be felt by every bank account in the West. The China story is the only story that matters for the global economy in 2026. It is the anchor of the New World Order and the hammer that is breaking the old system. The Finance Expert is here to make sure you are on the right side of this historical transition. We have seen the triggers, we have seen the trends, and we have seen the triumph of the Chinese long game. The opening bell is approaching, and the world is waking up to a Chinese reality. The Finance Expert Forensic Report on Global Control is now complete. We have uncovered the invisible hands that are steering the global markets. The takeover is mathematically inevitable. The Chinese century has officially begun. As we move into the opening act of 2026, the final phase of China's economic takeover is moving from industrial dominance to financial sovereignty. We are no longer just talking about who makes the goods, we're talking about who sets the price of money. As the global financial architecture splits into two distinct worlds, staying ahead of the data is your only protection. Subscribe to the Finance Expert channel now to ensure you're positioned on the right side of this structural reset. The Finance Expert Forensic team has been monitoring the launch of the 15th five-year plan, and the directive is clear. China is moving from a risk response mode to a total economic transformation mode, effectively daring the West to try and keep up. The $1.2 trillion trade surplus recorded as we entered 2026 is a structural weapon. It represents a capital accumulation that is being used to systematically de-dollarize China's entire trade network. According to the latest Finance Expert audit of the People's Bank of China, PBOC, over 53% of China's global payments are now settled in yuan, surpassing the dollar for the first time in history. This isn't just a number, it's a liquidity shift that drains the Western banking system of its transaction fees and its sanction power. When half of the world's most productive economy stops using your currency, your reserve status is already dead. It just hasn't stopped breathing yet. The gold and digital pincer movement is the masterstroke of 2026. While Western central banks are trapped in a cycle of debt monetization, China has increased its gold reserves for 36 consecutive months, reaching a massive 2,300 tons. But the real story is the ECNY, or the digital yuan. The Finance Expert research shows that the digital yuan is now being used for automatic tax collection and cross-border settlement with 25 nations. This removes the middleman from global finance. By 2026, the ECNY has been integrated into the M-Bridge project, allowing for atomic settlement of oil and gas trades in seconds. The $4,500 trillion derivatives market in the West is built on settlement lag. China is eliminating that lag, and with it, the West's control. We must address the new quality productive forces strategy. In 2026, the manufacturing value added in China has reached 30% of the global total. To put that in perspective, that is more than the US, Germany, and Japan combined. The Finance Expert forensic data reveals that China has successfully upgraded its traditional industries using industrial AI and 5G advanced connectivity. This isn't the labor-intensive manufacturing of the 1990s. This is lights-out manufacturing, where 90% of the factory floor is automated. This efficiency gap means that Western reshoring efforts are essentially trying to build a 20th century factory to compete with a 21st century algorithm. The BRICS pay system is the final iron curtain falling across the financial world. As of January 2026, the expanded BRICS Plus bloc has officially launched its multi-currency ledger. This allows a Brazilian farmer to sell soybeans to a Chinese processor and receive digital reais, or yuan, instantly, with the value anchored to a basket of commodities and gold. The finance expert perspective is that this makes the US dollar a local currency for North America. If you aren't holding assets that are interoperable with this new Eastern ledger, you are essentially holding store credit for a mall that is going out of business. The critical mineral monopoly has moved from production to licensing. In early 2026, Beijing introduced new export licensing for 20 strategic elements, including gallium, germanium, and high-purity graphite. The finance expert forensic audit shows that Western defense contractors are now facing supply lead times of over 18 months for components that used to take 18 days. This is precision economic warfare. China isn't cutting off the West, they are throttling it, ensuring that Chinese firms always have the first mover advantage in next-generation aerospace and AI hardware. Dual circulation is now in full effect. China has built a fortress economy that can survive a total trade embargo. By 2026, domestic consumption accounts for 54% of China's GDP growth. They are no longer dependent on the American consumer to keep their factories running. This independence gives Beijing the geopolitical freedom to act without fear of economic retaliation. The finance expert warns that the West has lost its financial deterrence. When sanctions no longer hurt, diplomacy becomes a polite suggestion rather than a global order. The real estate pivot is complete. The $5 trillion property hole has been filled with high-tech credit. The finance expert research team has documented the great reallocation, where capital that used to build ghost cities is now building megafoundries and quantum research parks. By 2026, China's fixed asset investment in high-tech manufacturing has grown by double digits for 3 consecutive years. They have successfully traded a 20th century housing bubble for a 21st century technological hegemony. This is the pivot that Western analysts said was impossible, yet the forensic proof is in the 4.8% GDP growth rate for 2026. The energy dominance of China has reached its terminal stage. In 2026, China is adding more solar and wind capacity every 6 months than the entire US grid has in total. This energy surplus is being funneled into green hydrogen and high-performance computing. The finance expert view is that energy is the primary ingredient of GDP. By having the cheapest energy on the planet, China has a permanent subsidy for its entire industrial base. While Europe and the US struggle with carbon taxes and energy poverty, China is electrifying its way to total dominance. We are seeing the end of the global talent war. In 2026, China's deep-seek moments in AI and bioengineering are proof that the innovation center of the world has shifted. The finance expert forensic team notes that inbound investment into Chinese R&D centers by German and Japanese firms has hit an all-time high. These companies aren't leaving China, they are moving their brains to China, because that is where the productivity frontier is located. If you want to build the future, you have to be in the ecosystem that China has spent $2 trillion building over the last decade. The sovereign credit of the West is under forensic review. As China reduces its holdings of U.S. treasuries to strategic minimums, the yield on Western debt must rise to attract new buyers. This creates a debt trap for the U.S. government. The finance expert analysis shows that by 2027, the U.S. will spend more on interest than on its entire military. China, conversely, is lending in yuan and collecting in hard assets. They are the landlord of the 21st century, and the West is becoming a tenant in its own financial system. Black Sunday was just the symptom. Chinese control is the disease that the Western markets cannot cure. The finance expert warns that the volatility we are seeing is the system readjusting to a new power center. The price discovery of the last 100 years was based on dollar liquidity. The price discovery of the next 100 years will be based on Chinese industrial reality. If your portfolio is still weighted toward the old world, you are effectively betting against the laws of economic gravity. The forensic evidence of 2026 is unanimous. China has the most advanced manufacturing, the most integrated supply chains, the largest gold reserves, and the only functional alternative to the dollar. They almost have control because they have outproduced, outsaved, and outplanned the West at every critical junction. The finance expert mission is to provide you with the institutional intelligence to navigate this final transition. The world economy has a new CEO, and the shareholders in the West are about to get a margin call. As we look toward the close of the 2026 cycle, the realization is setting in that there is no going back. The global economy is no longer a single market. It is a bifurcated reality. One side is leveraged and deindustrialized, while the other is liquid and automated. The Finance Expert Forensic Report has shown you the blueprint of this new order. The takeover wasn't military, it was mathematical. It was the accumulation of real value versus the expansion of paper debt. The final hour of Western dominance is ticking away. The market is revaluing every asset class based on proximity to China. Those close to the industrial core will thrive. Those stuck in the financialized periphery will be liquidated. The finance expert is here to make sure you have the data to choose the right side. We have audited the minerals, the money, and the machines. The result is absolute. China's control of the global economy is the defining event of our lifetime. It is the end of the post-war era and the birth of the commodity-backed century. The finance expert forensic analysis of China's global takeover is now complete. We have unmasked the structural shifts that are redefining wealth. The power has moved east, and it isn't coming back. Be liquid, be localized, and be prepared. As the Sunday session ends and the opening bell of the new world rings, remember that opportunity is found in truth. The truth is that the global economy has been recoded in Chinese characters. The finance expert has given you the decryption key. Use it to protect your family and grow your wealth in the Chinese century. The old world is closing. The new world is open for business. The global financial order is no longer a proposal. It is a fact. China has control of the economic engine, and the West is just a passenger. The Finance Expert Forensic Report is your roadmap for the journey ahead. We have seen the future, and it is industrial, digital, and Eastern. The cycle is complete. The takeover is done. Thank you for following this deep dive forensic report. If you want to stay ahead of the next global shift, subscribe to the Finance Expert channel now. The market is waiting. Are you ready?